On a spring morning in May 1934, along a desolate road outside Gibsland, Louisiana, a young couple were on their way to pick up a friend. Little did they know, but ahead of them, lurking in the trees, were a heavily armed posse of lawmen who'd been on their trail for weeks. The couple were none other than Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow, two of the most infamous outlaws in America, and front-page names across the country who, despite being cold-blooded killers, had captured the public's imagination in the depths of the Great Depression. Moments later, in a blaze of gunfire, two of America's most notorious outlaws lay dead. But who really were they? Why had they been named America's public enemy #1, and how exactly did they meet their end? In this video, using the latest technology, period imagery and testimony of those who were there, we'll track the Barrow Gang's trail of destruction across the Depression-era Dust Bowl and reconstruct the final moments of Bonnie and Clyde. To tell that story, we need to travel back in time a bit to south central United States, specifically Texas, Oklahoma and Louisiana during the Great Depression. It's fair to say that life in this part of the world following the Wall Street crash in 1929 was far from easy. Unemployment was rife, thousands of families existed near starvation, and opportunity to prosper were almost non-existent. It was against this backdrop that Bonnie and Clyde would come of age. Born in 1909 into a family of poor sharecroppers, Clyde Chestnut Barrow grew up in poverty. When his family first moved to this area of West Dallas, a rough and tumble slum on the edge of the city, the Barrow family lived in a tent. Life was hard and options were limited. Clyde loved music and taught himself to play the guitar and saxophone, but West Dallas wasn't kind to dreamers. By his teenage years, the pull of crime became irresistible, and scrapes with the law resulting in a series of powerful mugshots being preserved, which give a glimpse of that young man. Clyde started small, committing petty crimes, mostly theft, but as the years passed, his crimes escalated. By the time he met Bonnie, he'd already served jail time, including a stint in the brutal Eastern Texas prison, which is still operational to this day, where he reportedly committed his first murder in self-defense. That experience hardened him, turning an ambitious boy into a man determined never to return behind bars. But Clyde wasn't just a criminal. Those who knew him described him as fiercely loyal to his family and friends, with a magnetic personality that drew people in. He had a sense of humour and a quiet determination that masked the desperation and anger that simmered beneath the surface. Some 240 miles southwest of Dallas, in the small town of Rowena, Bonnie Parker was born. Unlike Clyde, Bonnie's early years were stable, at least at first. Her father, a bricklayer, provided for the family till his sudden death when Bonnie was just 4 years old. Widowed and left to care for her 3 children, Bonnie's mother moved the family to the Dallas suburb of Cement City, where they lived in poverty. Even in her youth, Bonnie stood out. Petite, with fiery red hair and a sharp wit, she was known for her intelligence and charm. She acted in school plays and wrote romantic poems in her spare time. Her flair for the dramatic and the arts would later capture the public's attention. She was, though, by 15 years old, finding herself in questionable company. Her high school sweetheart, Roy Thornton, was already at that time a notorious local criminal. The pair married shortly before Bonnie's 16th birthday, and over 2 extremely rocky years she would ultimately separate with Roy, serving a 50-year prison sentence, ultimately being shot and killed during an attempted prison break in Huntsville, Texas. Surely Bonnie's luck could only improve. There are several accounts of how she met her next love interest, Clyde Barrow, but it's widely accepted that they met through Clyde's friend Clarence Clay in January 1930. Clyde had made a house call here to Herbert Street in West Dallas, where his friend lived at number 105. The building no longer stands, but it was certainly somewhere along this very road that Clyde spotted Bonnie for the very first time. By all accounts, it was love at first sight. Bonnie saw in Clyde something she craved: adventure, excitement, a chance to break free. And for Clyde, Bonnie was more than just a girl. She was a partner, someone who'd stand by him no matter what. Their relationship was intense, electric, and before long, Bonnie and Clyde were inseparable. But they weren't alone on their crime spree. Behind their infamous exploits was a rotating cast of accomplices known as the Barrow Gang. A ragtag group bound together by loyalty, desperation, and the thrill of living outside the law. The Barrow Gang was a family affair, and Bonnie and Clyde ran with several family members and family acquaintances. Each member brought their own quirks, skills, and demons to the table, creating a web of loyalty and betrayal that kept law enforcement guessing at every turn. Let's meet the key players. Clyde's older brother, Marvin "Buck" Barrow, was the gang's seasoned outlaw. Buck had a knack for trouble and a heart that pulled him back to his family. Recently released from prison, Buck initially planned to go straight, but Clyde's pull was strong, and soon he and his wife Blanche joined the gang. Buck was a crack shot and a natural leader, but his impulsiveness often made him a liability. Blanche was Buck's wife, but her involvement in the gang was reluctant at best. A preacher's daughter, she didn't share her husband's criminal inclinations, yet her loyalty to Buck bound her to the gang, even as she begged him to leave the life behind. Blanche served as a chronicler of their exploits, later writing a memoir that offered a rare glimpse into the gang's chaotic world. W.D. Jones was just 16 years old when he joined the Barrow Gang, a wide-eyed kid drawn to the allure of danger. Jones idolised Clyde and quickly became his right-hand man, but his youth and inexperience often made him a nervous wreck during their heists. Over time, violence and chaos wore on him, leaving him disillusioned and terrified of the life he'd chosen. Then there was Henry Methvin, the gang's final recruit and a man whose loyalty was always in question. Methvin was desperate and unpredictable, qualities that made him both a useful ally and a dangerous liability. It was Methvin who would ultimately play a pivotal role in the betrayal that sealed Bonnie and Clyde's fate, but we'll come back to that later. The Barrow Gang were by no means criminal masterminds. They were simply folks hardened by a life of crime and driven by desperation. The gang was their family, and Bonnie and Clyde went to great lengths to protect them, even staging prison breaks. Despite this loyalty, the gang would ultimately be their undoing. After his stint in the brutal Eastern prison from 1930 to 32, Bonnie and Clyde and the Barrow Gang would go on a crime spree that would last almost 2 years, beginning with small-time heists in Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico and Missouri. In search of quick cash, Clyde quickly escalated to robbing banks, general stores and gas stations, sometimes pulling off multiple jobs in a single week. These robberies were fast, violent and chaotic. The gang robbed at least 15 banks during their crime spree, and their smaller heists were too numerous to get an accurate count. Despite the number of robberies, the take never exceeded $1,500 and sometimes was as small as $80. Life during the Great Depression Dust Bowl was difficult for everyone, including criminals. Increasingly in the public eye, it became hard for the gang to keep a low profile. In April 1933, Bonnie and Clyde, along with Clyde's brother Buck, Buck's wife Blanche and W.D. Jones, holed up in this small apartment in Joplin, Missouri. But the hideout would soon turn into a scene of chaos, blood and narrow escapes. Local police, including Constable John Wes Harriman and Detective Harry McGinnis, went to investigate what they thought were bootleggers. The neighbours had become suspicious due to many people coming and going from the home late at night and called the highway patrol. The troopers investigated the cars parked in the driveway and uncovered that the vehicle's registration did not match that of the renters of the property. This was enough evidence to get a search warrant. Harriman, McGinnis and troopers Carla, Grammer and a detective DeGraff showed up at 4 p.m. to serve the warrant. As the lawman rolled up, Clyde Barrow was at the garage door. The officers drove one car into the driveway to stop Clyde from closing the door. As Harriman got out of the car, Barrow killed him with a well-placed blast from his shotgun. McGinnis, in shock from the sudden death of his fellow lawman, got out the opposite side of the car and was immediately hit by another shotgun blast. Badly wounded, McGinnis was able to return fire. The lawmen were quickly overwhelmed as automatic rifle fire erupted from the house's windows, with McGinnis's arm almost severed by the withering fire. The surviving officers continued to return fire, but they were woefully unprepared for the level of firefight they'd walked into. After Kayla ran out of ammunition, Grammer went for help. The Barrow Gang seized the opportunity and drove off, firing wildly at DeGraff as they escaped. Among the chaos left behind, the police found a cache of material, including many of the photos you've seen today. Images of Bonnie and Clyde posing with guns, mocking the authorities, living on the edge. The photos will be published nationwide, making Bonnie and Clyde more famous than ever before. But what about those famous photos of the hardened criminals? Are they really what they seem to be at first glance? The media attempted to paint Bonnie and Clyde as hardened criminals, posing with stolen cars and guns. However, this is far from the truth. Bonnie's flair for the dramatic comes through in these photos. Although they're holding deadly firearms, the couple is smiling, even in the photo where Bonnie is aiming a shotgun directly at Clyde. These photos show that Bonnie's love of drama hadn't left her, and that despite their trail of destruction, they were still a young couple in their early 20s having fun. Despite the near miss in Joplin, ironically it was not a police bullet that was Bonnie and Clyde's first real brush with death, but rather a car crash just here outside Wellington, Texas. It was along this road on the 10th of June 1933 that Bonnie, Clyde and their accomplice W.D. Jones were travelling at their usual high speed. Not knowing the bridge ahead had been washed out by floods, they misjudged their approach, and by the time they realised, it was too late, with their Ford coupe leaving the road and slamming into this ravine. Flipping over and pinning Bonnie beneath the car, which almost immediately started to burn, the two men struggled to free a screaming Bonnie. Unaware of who was in the car, several members of the Pritchard family who had witnessed the crash from their nearby home rushed to help. Retrieving Bonnie just in time, they took her to their home as another family set off for help. Blanche Barrow would later recall just how serious Bonnie's injuries were. She was a mass of burns and cuts on her face, right arm and leg. Her chin was skinned to the bone, her chest was caved in although no ribs were broken. She was screaming and moaning and appeared to be unconscious. All of us thought she would pass before daybreak. In yet another close shave, when police and help did arrive, they were far from welcome. County Sheriff George Corrie and local police chief Paul Hardy were disarmed, handcuffed and bundled into the back of the sheriff's police vehicle, whilst the outlaws made their escape, with Clyde's parting actions being to offer his rescuer Sam Pritchard a roll of bills, saying, "For all the trouble we've been to you." Somewhere outside Sayre, western Oklahoma, their two captives were left at the side of the road, tied to a cottonwood tree with barbed wire. They could only watch on as Bonnie and Clyde made good their escape. Their next destination was Dexfield Park, Iowa, where they managed to lay low for several weeks before eventually being surrounded yet again by a posse from a neighbouring town. In the ensuing fight, Buck Barrow was fatally wounded. Bonnie and Jones were both also wounded but managed to make a desperate escape with Clyde on foot. Buck's wife Blanche, blinded by a shotgun pellet, was ultimately taken prisoner, the moment being captured in this famous photograph. By now, word of Bonnie and Clyde's exploits had spread nationwide and the media painted them as something bigger, something almost mythic. Clyde was portrayed as a slick, daring outlaw and Bonnie was a gun-toting, cigar-smoking bad girl who'd follow him to the ends of the earth. Increasingly desperate to bring the couple's crime spree to an end, this man, the legendary Texas Ranger Frank Hamer, was brought in, known for his stoic demeanour and unyielding sense of justice. Hamer was a larger-than-life figure in the annals of Texas law enforcement, but beneath the badge lay a man as dangerous and violent as the criminals he pursued. Hamer was no stranger to bloodshed. Over the course of his 27-year career, he'd killed more than 40 people in shootouts. After retiring in the early 1930s, he was called back into service to track down Bonnie and Clyde. The task suited him perfectly. Hamer was relentless, meticulous and driven by a personal disdain for those who flaunted the law. He studied the gang's habits, movements and hideouts, stalking them like prey. As the crime spree continued, it also became increasingly violent. One of the Barrow Gang's most notable escapades was a prison escape in January 1934 in Waldo, Texas, from the very same prison camp where Clyde had spent 20 months. He used his familiarity with the prison to stage the break and killed 2 guards whilst breaking out 5 prisoners. A few months later, near Grapevine, Texas, the Barrow Gang would again meet law enforcement with deadly results. On that day, Easter Sunday no less, experienced motorcycle cop Polk Ivy was looking after 2 new officers, Edward Wheeler and Holloway Murphy. It was only Wheeler's second day on the force. Ivy took Wheeler and Murphy out for some target practice, and the trio were cruising down Highway 114 just north of Grapevine when Wheeler and Murphy noticed what appeared to be some stranded travellers in their vehicles on the side of the road. Without consulting Ivy, Wheeler and Murphy U-turned their bikes and went to investigate the vehicle. Little did they know that the stranded travellers were none other than Bonnie and Clyde. As Wheeler and Murphy approached the car, The pair opened fire and sped away, leaving the rookie cops dead right here in the middle of the street, their pistols still holstered. Ivy, who had not made the U-turn, realised his partners were no longer following him and retraced his steps to find their bodies. For 2 years, Bonnie and Clyde had evaded police, surviving shootouts, close calls and near misses. But what they didn't know was that this time their capture wasn't just a matter of law enforcement closing in on them. It was a carefully orchestrated trap set by those they thought they could trust. Bonnie wrote poetry during their time on the run, some of which revealed her awareness of their doomed fate. Her poem, The Trail's End, written just weeks before their deaths, ends with the haunting line, "Someday they'll go down together, and they'll bury them side by side. To few it'll be grief, to the law a relief, but it's death for Bonnie and Clyde." One of their most trusted associates in the final months was Henry Methvin. He joined them in the robberies, he knew their hiding spots and was part of the gang's inner circle. But in May 1934, even Methvin's family was tired of the violence and constant threat of the law breathing down their necks. They wanted an out, and it was Methvin's father who struck a deal with Hamer to bring Bonnie and Clyde down. Methvin's father promised to help Hamer capture Bonnie and Clyde in exchange for leniency for his son. It was an offer Hamer couldn't refuse. Methvin's father informed Hamer that Bonnie and Clyde would be travelling down a quiet back road in Louisiana to meet up with Henry at his parents' house. They'd been in and out of the Methvin house in the weeks leading up to the ambush, and Methvin's father had overheard the couple's plans to return after attending a party in Black Lake, Louisiana on the night of the 22nd. This information was the final piece that Hamer needed to set the perfect trap. Just a quick line before we carry on. If you enjoyed this show, we think you'll love our new Untitled History podcast. Hosted by historian Gareth Edwards, who is joined each week by global experts, it explores everything from the history of ship's cats to how to conduct a 17th century highway robbery. It's insightful, engaging, and right up your street if you like what we do. Just search the Untitled History podcast on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts and give it a follow. Thanks for your support. So, in the early morning hours of the 23rd of May 1934, Hamer and 6 other officers set an ambush along this road in Bienville Parish, just 8 miles south of Gibsland, not far from the Arkansas state line. Hamer and his men had learned from prior failed ambushes. The thick metal doors of Barrow's Ford had stopped the small pistol rounds of Thompson's submachine guns dead in their tracks. Hamer this time came armed with Browning automatic rifles, which fired massive 30-06 rounds. Additionally, one of the posse, Sheriff Henderson Jordan, had been an infantryman in the First World War and used his experience to position the posse. The ambush was set up perfectly, but they still needed Bonnie and Clyde to slow down to give the posse time to line up their shots. Hamer forced Henry Methvin's father to jack up his truck on the side of the road, knowing it would slow Clyde down just long enough for Hamer to strike. It was a cruel irony. The same people who had sheltered the gang were now setting them up for their fatal encounter. Bonnie and Clyde had no idea they were driving into their final moments. Trusting their friends, they were vulnerable and unprepared. There are conflicting accounts of whether or not Hamer gave them an opportunity to surrender. What is certain is that Clyde Barrow and Bonnie Parker drove along this road at their customary high speed. They slowed on recognising Methvin, who was stopped just here. Then the posse opened up, hammering the couple's car with more than 130 rounds from all sides. The Riddle vehicle crashed into a ditch as the men kept firing. In under 2 minutes it was over. Bonnie and Clyde were dead. The aftermath of that famous moment on an unassuming road in rural Louisiana was preserved for history by a series of powerful shots which show the location, vehicle and bodies of the young couple, who, though armed, never fired their weapons before they met their end here in May 1934. Even in death, the couple captured America's imagination. Taken to the nearby town, their Ford was put on display at the local dealership, as too were their bodies on the tables of a local cafe. Arcadia became an absolute circus as people from Texas, Louisiana and the surrounding areas gathered to catch one last glimpse of the infamous outlaws. But the story of Bonnie and Clyde didn't die on that road. In fact, their deaths only cemented their legacy. The car, the bullets, the blood-soaked clothes, they became relics, pieces of American folklore. Bonnie and Clyde were transformed, no longer just two lovers on the run, but symbols of rebellion in a time where so many felt powerless. To this day, Bonnie and Clyde are remembered as America's most infamous outlaw lovers. They were human, flawed, and very much a product of their time. And in the end, their story was nothing more than a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when you're willing to risk it all, even when you know the odds are stacked against you. Today, both are buried in Dallas, less than 10 miles from where they met. In death, they were finally separated, and at the request of Bonnie's mother. But though Bonnie and Clyde are gone, their legend, well, that lives on, and perhaps that's what they wanted all along. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this content and would like to see more just like this, why not check out our channel right here on YouTube. Your feedback is really important to help us continue to improve in our videos, so please take a moment, share your thoughts in the comments below, and let us know, do you think history has remembered Bonnie and Clyde fairly? That's all this time. We'll see you again soon.